Hi there. The problem for this hack is how do you set up the Google Apps for EDU suite in a way that protects student privacy and follows all the federal regulations that are associated with running a school and protecting student information and privacy and safety. So we're going to explore this, but it should be clear that I'm not a lawyer. I just did a fair amount of research looking into this and looked at different opinions that in some cases, talked to a couple lawyers. And arrived at what I think is a helpful compromise between what are some fairly strict interpretations that date back 10 or 15 years and what we hope is going to be a place where schools kind of take the lead in developing good policy. So let's start by looking at what Oregon has done. Oregon State actually entered into a contract with Google and is actually offering apps domains to all their districts in the state. And one of the things they're requiring is that all students with accounts have to have a signed consent form on file with the school district. So if you wanted to dig in and actually do your own research, Oregon Virtual School District site has some great resources on how they went about setting this up. But just start going through and looking at a few of the concerns that one would need to address and look at the way Oregon addressed them. The first is kind of a big bucket that deals with privacy of minors, and the federal law that relates to that is called COPPA, or the Children's Online Protection or Privacy Protection Act. And it applies really only to kids under 13 and only in the context of their use of commercial websites. So this is a fairly easy requirement to meet because Google explicitly does not use any student information for commercial purposes in its platform. So therefore, we can get around COPPA as long as we're using apps for EDU. If you had students signing up for regular Gmail accounts, you would not be satisfying this criteria. So it also states in the permission form that they give parents that the school is able to act as an agent for the parents if during the context of information collection. So that's another way to handle this. And I'll provide the language of this permission slip so that folks can copy it and use it if they want. So really the concrete step to take here in satisfying COPPA is that if you want to provide student accounts, use a permission slip based on Oregon's template and make it part of your school's intake process. And this is especially true if you're running an elementary or middle school and providing student accounts. So that's one dimension. Another dimension of concern that one would be interested in solving is how do you protect minors from harmful content and people if you're giving them full-powered email accounts. And there's a law related to this called SIPA, which is the Children's Internet Protection Act of 2001. And SIPA applies only to schools that get federal FCC funding for their equipment discount. And this is actually virtually all school districts. So if you're a public school, SIPA applies directly to you, most likely. And either way, it's a good idea probably to do something, particularly with younger students. And so the school is required by SIPA to have technology measures and policies, i.e. an Internet Acceptable Use Policy, which is why you see schools doing this. And it has to protect students from harmful materials, including obscenity and pornography. So in the case of Oregon, this is language from their permission slip. This means that student email is filtered. Mail containing harmful content will be blocked. How do they do this? Well, they use what's called Postini Message Security, which is an integrated part of the Google Apps for EDU suite and is free. And this is what the control panel for it looks like at a base level. And you can see that sexually explicit, get rich quick, special offers, racially insensitive, any of those categories currently are set with a multiplier so that they are strictly blocked. And this would be considered a reasonable measure to take to help protect students from this kind of content. The second thing you have to consider is what about students sending inappropriate content to one another or using hateful language with one another? In particular, in the docs and chat side of the equation, because Postini only filters email. And so if you enable chat on your domain, you may be opening yourself up. And so there's a workaround, and that is presumably while the student's in school, there's the ability for a teacher to closely monitor what they're doing. And if anything inappropriate is happening, it can be reported to the teacher. Conversely, at home, you can make the parent responsible through your Internet Acceptable Use policy and through this permission slip. So the state of Oregon includes this clause that says, by doing so, I agree to enforce acceptable use when my child is off district property. And so this sort of covers you in case that some of your services are not blocked by filters. It nevertheless makes clear the family is responsible. So concrete steps to take. Make sure you've enabled Postini message security. It does not come automatically installed. You've got to take an extra step to install it. So have your IT people look into it and make sure that it's been installed. Make sure that any large email groups that you have are set as announcement only. So depending on who set up your listservs, it can be very handy. But if they're set up as lists that anyone can send to, then anything that does get through the filter or that a student wants to send as a prank can end up hitting all your students, which is a real disruptive event. So make sure that they're set up as announcement only so that only list owners can send to them. Ensure that your Internet Acceptable Use policy includes the mention of parent responsibility. Already talked about this. And there's a great product on the market. It's part of the Google Apps Marketplace called Teacher Dashboard. We've got a couple schools trying it this year. Fairly affordable. But it's, in addition to being a very handy way to organize school-wide documents, it gives teachers and admins as much view as you want into any student doc, email, or web-facing content like blogs. So it gives you a lot more ability to comply with SEPA and also just to be effective with kids. So check that out. So a third major concern that one would have to deal with is this idea of the confidentiality and the ability for access of educational records. So you've got a legal responsibility to make sure that information is safe and also accessible to the right people. And this is defined in FERPA, the Federal Education Rights and Privacy Act. And I'm not going to read all this, but essentially this is language from the Oregon release form, and it has to do with defining what is considered confidential, defining what directory information is, which is actually information about students that can be made public without any signed consent. It also deals with the right to investigate. So if a child's parent requests that they can go into their email account or their docs, it says that they have the right to do so. So defining an educational record, FERPA defines it pretty broadly. So it's anything directly related to a student, any information recorded in any way that's about a student, including but not limited to handwriting, print, etc. And so this would presumably include any Gmail or docs, in particular written by faculty about students, or in particular any spreadsheets or forms that you might be using to collect information or logs about students. And so that's in contrast, I think, to what we need to understand to be student work. And student work, in a very generous interpretation of FERPA, could be considered part of the educational record, as long as the school keeps it. But schools in general don't make a habit of keeping, for example, student notebooks. So I think there needs to be a sliding standard here for sort of what constitutes a core part of the student's record. And obviously a student's Google Docs would not be something that falls into that category. Chancellor's regulations in New York City Department of Ed actually tell us something slightly different. They use the word student records and actually say that we have an obligation to keep them for at least 10 years after the student has graduated. And we need to be clear here that this is not a reference to all student work. It's a reference to all the key data points and presumably the file that might sit in an office on a student. So bearing that in mind, there's also the requirement in the Chancellor's regs that you have to protect the confidentiality of those records. And this is really just a reiteration of FERPA. How do we do so? Well, one way is in your docs settings. So if you are keeping some amount of student data in Google Docs, you want to make sure that you're aware of what the sharing settings are on the domain. So this is in the Google control panel. So you need to make a decision about whether you want to allow users to share outside the domain. And the blue box would be the more secure of the two settings here. The red box shows the one that's higher risk. It's sort of up to you to decide how much risk you want to take. The downside of going with the blue is that users can't actually share across Gmail accounts. And a lot of teachers have private Gmail accounts, and a lot of collaborators that might not be part of your faculty then can't be shared in on documents. It also means, though, that that students can't publish their docs in a way that the public can see it, which if you're using student portfolios and whatnot, you might want to be able to have public-facing work. So you need to make a decision here. Again, the blue is the safer of the two. And the last big concern that I think probably ought to cause the most concern for teachers in particular is that if and when accusations of impropriety on the part of a teacher are made by students, there's a need for being able to dig up that evidence and either protect a teacher or do what's necessary to discipline a teacher or to discipline a student. And so how do we make sure that there's easy access when that kind of thing occurs? And these are the steps that I recommend for both dealing with FERPA and for dealing with this last concern about investigations. So start by making sure that you have a clear policy in your staff handbook reiterating the definition of a student record as exists in FERPA, and make sure that they understand that anything they write in your online systems that's related to students is something that a parent could request access to. So you want to be sparing about what it is that you're actually recording. You also want to have faculty add a confidentiality clause in their email footer, so email doesn't get forwarded that contains sensitive student information. And this is a way to cover it and assign responsibility to whoever actually leaked the information rather than the organization. You want to ensure that the student records that are created or captured in Google Docs are ultimately logged in some other system. At this point, there's not a real reliable way to do long-term archiving of Google Docs, and so you either want to download them and keep them in some kind of a redundantly backed up system, or just make sure that they're in the DOE system and let your school district worry about the archiving of those. Lastly, there is a product on the market, again through Postini, that can be plugged into your Google domain, and with an educational discount at $16 a year, this would be, and this is something that does message discovery, so you can actually archive and very easily find all emails on every single account that has this turned on for up to 10 years. And I would recommend doing this just on faculty. I think if it were done on student accounts, it'd be prohibitively expensive. And finally, if you wanted to be adventuresome, there's a cheap solution that would involve getting a cloud server and using Amazon storage. That's very, very cheap. But you'd need to dig into the technical know-how, and this is pretty difficult, but to set up an outbound email gateway, which basically takes every single email that's sent from a user in your domain and archives it in a folder on that server. So that is possible, and I'll include a link to those instructions. But basically, if you do all the things that I've recommended in this video, you should be a lot further along in making sure that if things ever do get ugly, everyone's covered legally.